Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the COO's Corner podcast, the podcast exploring success factors in the world of business operations. My name is Tamara Nelson, your host, and a specialist in the area of operational resilience. Today, we are here to discuss the Great Resignation. Whose problem is it? COOs play a very important role in organizations, and I believe they oversee the heart of the organization, right? The operations. But I also believe that people are at the core of what we do. Both work together to create the best outcomes for the organization and affect every aspect of business. The hot topic for many today is the Great Resignation. Some pay attention to it and have a proactive approach, and some have adopted a sera kind of attitude. And others are even like, well, what is the Great Resignation? They've never heard of it. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that it is real and it can affect survival within business. How do we tackle it? Whose responsibility is it anyway? In today's episode, we will discuss and answer these questions and more with the Craig Foreman. Craig is the lead people specialist at Culture Amp, where he both supports organizations to build effective people and culture strategies, along with building the world's largest community of people who believe that a better world of work is possible. 4,000 plus companies, ladies and gentlemen. At the core of his work is his mission to help the world work better by improving the places we work. He holds a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology and is a proud veteran of U.S. Air Force. So let's dive right in. Craig, welcome to the podcast.
Wow, Tamar, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and even listening to your opening, I'm excited and hope to learn as well, because this is unique for me. I don't typically talk to this audience, so it's been really interesting talking to you and thinking about, you know, the messages and the things I've learned and seen to speak to the CEO community. So it's exciting to be here. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the insights, what I've seen and learned in my journey, and seeing where we go with this and how I can support your community as well.
Awesome. I am truly honored, Craig, to have you here on our program. And Craig is a superstar in the people and culture space. And I met Craig through a mutual connection a few months ago when I indicated that I really wanted a guest to speak to what's affecting businesses globally, the Great Resignation or the Great Attrition. So some of the stats that we are seeing in 2021 from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have reported that there is an overall turnover rate of about 57.3% of the labor force. That's huge. 25% of that is voluntary. Craig, what have you been observing happening in organizations today?
Well, I want to start by saying I do believe it's tricky, because I think there's so many things happening and there's so many things swirling at once that almost holding that also and being careful not to make any big assumptions. There's a lot happening right now. And I too, like you, am questioning, what are we seeing? What is going on? We are seeing a lot of turnover. We are seeing a lot of movement. I think we know that some of this has been pent up, right? That people through the pandemic have felt stuck, and that was an opportunity. So I think we have a little bit of that energy releasing. I'm also hearing a lot from talent professionals how hard it is to keep up, to fill these roles, and how overwhelmed they are. And interestingly enough, now it may be anecdotal, but I feel more now than ever, and I think I have a pretty good finger on the pulse and talking to a lot of people that are looking for jobs and how hard it is for them. And I find that very interesting, that if this is economics of supply and demand, what's happening? If, so much news is saying that all these jobs and the Great Resignation, what's happening and why is it so hard, at least from my perspective? And finally, I think what's so interesting from a person that thinks a lot about organizations and creating more human-focused organizations, okay, they're leaving. Where are they going? I do believe, I don't think we have a balance of organizations that are not culture, what we call culture first, or putting humans first in the organization, and those that are. So it's a very interesting time where people are moving around. Are they moving around just to find the next role to continue this journey of looking for better places to work? So those are a lot of the factors, but I'll tell you, I am sensing the stress and pressure everywhere on the job seekers, on the talent professionals, on the HR professionals. And maybe we'll come back to this, but I keep finding myself wanting to, instead of saying the Great Resignation, which I know that's happening, get a lot of talk about, I think a lot more about the Great Transformation. I think that's what's really happening, and what are the different inputs and factors that are taking place right now.
I love that, the Great Transformation. And it looks great that it's on all front. So on the supply side, on the demand side, everybody is changing, really. So the world of work is changing. And, you also spoke about pent-up pressure. And I think when we spoke some time ago, you gave an illustration of a balloon that is blown up, and you hold the tip of it and you let it go, and you don't know what direction it's going to go, and it's out of your control. And that's pretty much what we are seeing, that built up pressure being released. And so everything is not scientific, is not something that we have ever seen before. So we have to learn as we go along. And so the question is, what does culture have to do with it?
I think what you just spoke about, I love that analogy. I heard somebody say that, or like a hose that was clamped and open. Would you try to predict where the water is going to go? So I think we need to be careful of not getting too predictive in this situation when you got this release. But what would you be? I imagine you'd be more agile. You'd kind of watch the whole situation. You'd back up. You'd let the pressure move. And so I think in this case, the agility is important. And I've been seeing this over the years, that I think this idea of agility used to be with engineers, and agile development and all that, and that you're starting to see this idea of agility everywhere, which I think is important. And to the CEOs, to the CEOs, we really are moving to a space of truly an agile organization. And what does that mean? And I think there's a couple components, but look, Culture Amp has tools to help organizations listen to their employees, and I think that's what it really comes down to. We have to do even better now. If we're going to be agile, if this is spouting in all different directions, and we're trying to get a sense of what's going on, the best thing you can do is tap into and understand what's the sentiment, what's happening, and which drives to the bigger picture. Like I said before, I do believe part of this is people saying, I want something different. It can be better. There are better organizations, but also to all of our organizations, how do you become the better, more attractive organization? Because if all of these people are moving around, this is your opportunity to capture some really amazing talent that's looking for an alternative. And that goes back to, what are you doing to build a healthy, more human-focused culture, which I happen to believe is really going to be, we've been talking about it, but I think now more than ever, organizations that are able to listen to, adapt, and serve, that servant leadership kind of attitude towards their employees are going to be the winners. And
so we have to live it. We have to be living it now.
You have to be living it. You have to be. I think it used to be. I think over the years it's gotten harder and harder. In 10 years ago, you had somebody dedicated to your kind of employee branding, and they would put the word out, and create content. But those days are over. With the tools that we have and the ability that employees have more and more to really see what's going on and understand your organization before they get there, hear from their friends and colleagues. On top of the fact, if this is what's going on, when they show up and realize that what you just sold them was not the truth, number one, they're going to stick around. How are they going to feel? So now you've started to undermine your culture from day one. Or number two, they're going to be gone again. And the cost, think about the cost in your organization of that turnover. It's dramatic, both financially and from performance perspective, because so much energy and time is being wasted on the replacement training, onboarding of these new employees, versus really having effective employees that are focused and are ready to go and working towards the task.
Absolutely. And trust is a big part of culture, right? Once you undermine trust, it's downhill from there. And you mentioned something else in terms of the cost. And one study showed that it costs an employer 33% of an employee's yearly salary for their exit. So we're talking big bucks. And this is emphasizing the need for retention. And
the bucks are only going up. I mean, I'm also hearing people say, I can't believe when we make offers, how much more we're losing candidates left and right, and how much more they're asking for than they ever have before. Right. So those dollars are becoming more and more expensive, and the cost. And that's only if you put a financial. I mean, what's the cost emotionally to the work and like camaraderie and team, all of it that takes a toll on your organization.
Exactly. So, I've seen where some businesses have offered retention bonuses. And I believe that that's only short term. And we need to take a more, a long term view of this whole matter of retention, Craig. What are some of the things that, you mentioned digging deep or speaking to the people, having a good grasp of what exactly is happening. So that analysis is important. What else can businesses do?
Well, I think the first thing is, it's such an interesting between kind of a benchmark and see what's happening in the industry, or running tools like ours that are going to help you listen to and quantify. But I think what's unique around, our tools they're not just survey tools. They're survey tools specifically designed to measure sentiment among employees, diversity, equity, inclusion. We're doing onboarding, we're doing engagement, and we also have a performance management side. But where I'm going with that is that what I think is unique, and it's not answering the question directly, is that having a good system in place to understand what matters most to your employees, right? If you have a highly, if your team is more engineers, that may look different than a fleet of drivers, right? Or people in the food services industry. And what our tools do not only we measure the sentiment, but we look at, of your engaged employees, what were the impact of those different questions? So we measure engagement as an outcome, right? And those are focused around say, stay, and thrive, right? Say would be proud and recommend your company to a friend or somebody else they know. Stay is, do they see themselves there in 2 years' time, and are they currently looking? And thrive is that motivation. Are they willing to go above and beyond? So what we believe is and it's pretty standard, I think, in the industry accepted, that if you have somebody that's talks highly of your organization, is willing to go above and beyond and sees themselves there, both aren't looking and sees themselves there in 2 years' time, you've got a pretty highly engaged employee, right?
Yes.
So we ask all of your employees those questions together to get an outcome factor, which is engagement. That's what we're measuring for. And this is really interesting, I think, for leaders, that we shouldn't be targeting. I often see organizations where they bonus or reward their executives based on engagement. Rather, what we do then is ask a series of questions underneath that around leadership, management, systems and processes, right? Belonging and acceptance, those sorts of things, and relate those questions back to engagement and say, which of these questions have the highest correlation to highly engaged employees? Ooh. And then we can start to see, well, look, you might have a question that has a really high score and is highly engaged. Wonderful. But you also might see a question that has a low engagement, or a low scoring score that has high impact. That's a pretty good indicator of there's a place to focus. And again, I'm saying this because there's so much data and information that one of the tricks is, where do I look and where do I focus my time and energy? So I'll give you a good example. Historically, there's a question in our survey around compensation. Mm-hmm. Now, compensation it's the average of the score is about 50% of employees will score that at 4 or 5, right? And so strong scoring. So about 50% of the employees are not either neutral or not happy with compensation. Let's say that was your results. You came back, you ran a survey, and you said, well, that's where we need to focus. However, we also know that in almost all scenarios, compensation is a very low driver of engagement, right? So it's being able to take the right pieces of data, not just a score, but also understand how that score connects to the thing the outcome, what you're trying to drive. And to wrap that up, I think for COOs and leaders and people that have a high influence on how you're working with your executives, we recommend bonus your executives on the drivers that you believe and that you have data show will drive high, outcome, versus, because if you only focus on the outcome, people will do weird things and sideways things and will manipulate. So focus on the activities that will drive the behaviors you want. And you can only get to that information by having some way to gather and understand what's happening inside your organization.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I'm seeing as well, Craig, is this whole matter of persons wanting, more challenge, happiness, empowerment, recognition. They want to know how their job fits into the big picture. Compensation is not the issue or the answer in many of the cases that we're seeing. And, young people they're searching for the next best thing. So it's not only about the Benjamins. We have to look at those drivers.
Less and less if you look generationally about the Benjamins. I mean, I just laid out a situation, but I will share what are the across the board top drivers of engagement?
Yes.
Open and honest two-way communication,
Oh,
right? That my leaders share a vision that that I understand. I understand the direction of the organization, and that belonging. I feel like I belong at this organization. That I have a place
wow.
here. Are
Wow.
typically some of the the highest drivers of engagement. So. And if it takes data, it takes different leaders respond to different things, but the data points that out. And how do we create those environments? And something you said, prior to my work at Coltramp, and I've been here, gosh, 4.5 years now. But I did work for a company called Achievers, where I focus a lot on recognition and rewards, and we are putting in tools and software to help with that. But I will say that one of these big ahas I really came to during that time there is, and it still stands true, and I bounce this against my work today, that at the core of so much, fundamentally, humans want to be seen and heard.
Ah,
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And how can we create environments where people can be seen and heard, and we have healthy ways of saying yes and healthy ways of saying no? I mean, we can do all of that and still help people feel seen and heard. And I think that's where recognition comes in, and that communication comes in, and all the things we tend to see in these survey results.
right. So is Craig, is it hard to do getting employees seen and heard in an organization? Does it cost a lot of money? Can small businesses do it, or is it just large companies are able to create programs that have that or pull that engagement that we need to thrive in this dispensation?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, it's very hard, and it's not hard at all, right? And what I mean by that is, another thing I've dug into some interesting issues, and I'm constantly talking and thinking about this with people that are in this space. And there's moments where we're talking about solutions and how do we do this and what are the right programs. And then there's a moment where I think, the answer is just being human. We know what to do. I need to lay this person off, and I'm not sure if they're performing. And I think when we just strip back and go, okay, let's be human. How would you do that as a human? And I almost think we've gotten so far away in our organizations with policy and procedure and fair and all these things.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to say fair, but like everything has to be perfectly equitable, where we can't do anything that is unique or understanding the situation. It gets so complicated that in the end, the answer is quite simple, that we all know if you could just step it back and take yourself out of the equation, which I'll talk about in a second, the answer is, how would you want to be laid off? And if this person's not performing, and that story that probably because you're feeling awkward about having to fire that person is they don't do their job, they're taking advantage, versus, wow, their person is struggling and maybe this is a bad fit, and gosh, we hired that person. We made that choice too. We're partly responsible for the situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
How would we want to do it? And if we can start to move towards that. So at that level, I think it's simple. I think that if we really sit people down and get them in an environment where they can be open and honest, they can see the simplicity. But where's the complication? I think the complication and the expense is the transform our organizations to allow. I think everybody has to. I've talked about it, and for those that aren't watching, I'm pointing out to fix it, right? Pointing out to those big problems and the policies. Answers, fix it, right? Like if every leader and every manager and every employee ultimately has a space to reflect, look at why it's driving them, how are they showing up. If that employee's coming in late and they're being triggered, and maybe that's a story they have about what it means and all these things, versus sitting down and saying, I'm gonna stay curious, what's going on? Well, I take the bus to work, and
So
it's
it's
really
all.
hard. And I
So
have two children.
it
What's
all
that?
starts. It all starts with the man in the mirror, right?
No, it starts with the man in the mirror. And my point is, it's okay. But I think great leaders, the work really, can you take yourself out of the equation? And there's work in that. So when you ask me the expense, my mind goes to creating learning and development programs, leading by example, skilling. So there is a cost to it. I'm sure there's a cost to it. But I'll share a story. We recently had an employee whose father unfortunately passed away. And she was a newer employee too. She'd only been with us for 4 or 5 months when this happened. And she went home, and we said, take the time you need. We've got you. We'll figure this out. Don't worry about HR right now. Go do what you need to do. Right. So she went home and she was kind of like, whoa, really? And she has a sister, and her sister had been working for another organization for, about 5 years. And they both got home, and we were checking in, and she had mentioned that her sister got 3 days of leave and then had to figure if she was going to use her PTO or was going to go back home.
Wow.
Right. Which is pretty standard if you think about it. I mean, that is, a lot of policies are, this is what it is. So I want to be careful because I've been in organizations that's just, there's a policy, that's the thing. And I remember when she said it, number one, how it was like, I love when I get to see it in action. So number one, it was like, wow, that was very clear. Like, I'm so happy that we are able to do that for her. And she could just take the time she needs to get her head straight, do what she needs to do with her family before she returns.
Right.
But then I also thought to myself, now these two employees go back to their workplaces. What returned to us and what returned to the other workplace, right? Like, is she going to go above and beyond the one that returned that 3 days? Give a little extra, give a little more, and the next time that we need our employee, we're like, hey, we're in a situation, we could use you. So what's the ROI on that?
Yeah. What's the productivity of that person when they go back in?
And that's that human piece of where we just kind of seem to miss the mark sometimes and undermine ourselves because it's like we're saving $1, but like, what is it? What is it? A dollar, a pound foolish or dollar short, something like you save $1 and you cost you 100.
Penny wise, pound foolish.
There it is.
Right. And so we tend to forget that, Craig, the human side of work. And, we think that people are, pieces of equipment or capital, we just, even that term human capital is now, not something that is desirable because it takes the humanity out of it. And, I saw a similar case, where that you spoke of in an organization. And, what I also find, and you can tell me if you have seen that is true, that often when we receive that kind of behavior, we pass it on to persons. But as leaders, I think even if we are, the ones that receive it, we don't have to pass it on to those that work for us. We have that opportunity and the power to say, hey, let me be the change in this space. And let me be human. We always tend to focus on, the policy says, and we know that you can get around that policy if you really want to. And this is a good cause. If somebody is sick, somebody lost somebody, think about, that person, how you would feel in that situation.
How do you want to be treated? Simple question.
Yeah.
To be the change you want to see in the world, how would you want to be treated?
Absolutely.
If you lost somebody, I don't know. And maybe it is even, I remember in the old years ago, somebody lost a pet and they wanted some time off. And I remember people like making jokes about it. But now as I go through life, that can be traumatic. It's not my place to judge.
Exactly.
I want to take care of you as a human. And if, this idea that we're going to like create systems to keep them from taking advantage of, I believe we can spot and deal with the people that are taking advantage without creating sweeping systems that makes everybody feel like they are somebody that's going to take advantage. And guess what? I always think about the experiment at the college with the prisoners and the guards. And it's within hours, the guards started treating the prisoners like prisoners and the prisoners started acting like prisoners because I think we create these scenarios and people will fall into these systems very quickly.
Yeah.
And it is our leaders' responsibility because especially now in the way our organizations are set up, hierarchical the way they are, you have such an ability to change this through your actions and the influence. You set the standard. And I think the status quo just keeps going and no one's willing to risk a little bit to push against the status quo, but it's time. It's been time. And I think if anything in the next few years,
we have to reframe, we have to rethink the way how we are doing things. And some persons may argue, Craig, that it's hard to build engagement in a hybrid situation. How can I do so, with persons working from home? It's impossible if I'm not seeing them at their desk and can walk over to them and speak to them. What would you say to this person?
Well, I've had this conversation, and I think in some scenarios, maybe it's not optimal. I've met with people that they make a very good case for why the work they do in person is important. Yeah. And, I also think, our CEO said very early on, this is not just people working from home. Now I think this is starting to shift. This is people working from home in the pandemic. Like, let's be clear what we're dealing with here. I think there's two separate things, and people that are trying to manage childcare and the monotony, the whole thing. So what I would say, but I would also push back. I think that is a very, I just think of scarcity and abundance. It's a scarcity amount. We can't. It can't. How might you? How might you do it a little bit better, right? One thing I've heard people say is like, ask your managers what percentage of the time that when they meet with their employees, they're talking about work stuff and they're just talking about human and personal and connecting. Some people say it should be 50-50, right? So I'd ask all those leaders, take an audit of your meetings. What do they look like? What's going on? Are people connected? Are people sitting at a screen, staring and, oh gosh, they don't like Zoom and they don't this and that. I am blown away. Now there's different reasons why I've gotten to play with some of these different things. And by the way, I'm an in-person person. I love facilitating. And when this all happened, we were building a community that was going to be in-person events. And very quickly we had to pivot to virtual. And even I was like, ugh. But I think it was a beautiful experiment, opportunity to look at how do we create meaningful human connections virtually. And that's what we've been doing. We have over 60 chapters globally now.
Wow.
We were in 150 events last year. It's amazing.
150 in a pandemic.
And that was not Culture Amp led. Those were organic events that were being put on by people around the world who wanted to continue these conversations.
Wow.
And do it in a culture first way. But we also have a methodology. Maybe this is important. I should share this because I think this is important. Sure. And we're talking about meetings. So maybe this will let me just tie it all together because I was going to say one thing. We had a couple things we had to think about when we built that. How do we build a community like this? And we want it to be global. We can't tell. We have a chapter in Pune, India. We have one in Perth, Australia. Like we can't tell those chapters what to be talking about because there's different things that they should be talking about. So the question was, how do we build this? We got clear on the who and the what. I think that was important for any community of people. Like, what are we doing? And same for an organization. Why are you together and what are you together for? Because there's a reason, or if that's loose, then you can have some issues.
Yeah.
The second piece was if we can't prescribe content per se, if we can't, what holds it all together and how will people know that they're part of this? And that was, we came up with these core principles. And I think to an organization that would be your values, right? What's the underlying glue that people can latch their own values onto and connect and stay connected? But the third one, which I think is gonna be very functional, and Culture Amp, I believe, led really good events prior. That was part of how we came to this. But one of the things was, how do we build a model that allows for really good events, which at the time wasn't even going to be virtual, but we adapted it. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is because this model, and I've worked with leaders since, is great for meetings as well. It's not just, it's a good experience design. And I'm going to walk you through it, and I'm going to circle back to what I was about to say. There's 5 parts. The welcome. Anytime you have a meeting, is there welcome? I think about it. We're talking human, right?
Yep.
Give people a moment to get there. Whatever that looks like, figure that out in your own organization. But is there the energy of welcoming? I mean, walking in and it's just like, all right, let's get started. We're going to do, like, where would you bring somebody into your home and do that? You would offer them a cup of water or tea, whatever.
Yeah,
there is a welcoming energy.
How are you?
That we are big on is connection. That before we get to any sort of work, connecting. And that's where I'm going to go back to that. But before we begin any sort of work, and it could be a 30-minute meeting or a 2-hour or a half-day offsite, taking a moment to allow people to connect as individuals, as humans. And you can do it around the theme of whatever you're working on, but it's not the work. It is about connecting. Mm-hmm. The third is the work. What are we here to do? I mean, it could be a budgeting meeting, and it could be we're here to dig into an issue, and it could be we're here to do a panel discussion. Whatever, that doesn't matter. That's the work. The action, what are we going to do now? And the most important that gets missed so often, the close. Mm-hmm. End the meeting. We often run out of time in the middle of the work. There's no clarity. There's no next steps. There's no accountability. So energetically, it could be a checkout. It could be a recap. It's just bring it to an end. Even if you have 2 minutes left, you can hit those marks. And when you do, anybody listening to this, I challenge you, try this for a week in your meetings, follow that framework and see if you get a different response. However, I want to circle back to the connection piece that we started talking about. One of the things I've been able to do a lot because of technology, some of the values are, we will do meetings where we'll have everybody kind of do a quick reflection and put like a word in their name. What are you feeling right now? What's one word? How would you describe yourself in this moment? Maybe it'll be a quick grounding. But imagine if you went into every meeting in person, everybody had to pick a name badge, write a word of how they were feeling, stick it on their chest. That simple piece, as the meeting goes on, if you look over and you see somebody's tired, if you look over somebody says, I'm frustrated, it changes the dynamic and just a little bit of insight. And I'm telling you, we started doing this. We've been doing it anyways. We've been, especially meetings I'm involved in, check-ins. I'm watching, particularly the teams I'm on. I really believe that simple act of holding some space in the beginning for people to just simply check in before you get to the meeting is transforming how we meet. And we are a highly effective, highly functioning team. And somebody might say, well, we don't have time for that. And I just think it's funny that we laugh sometimes. Sometimes 50% of our meetings is about connecting and getting there, and we still get as much work done.
Exactly.
And I believe we are outperforming other teams that don't do that sort of work. So I guess that's where the human meets the operational, and give it a test. If you're analytical, run an experiment. Have one of your
Right.
leaders do that for 3 months and go check in with that team and see how people feel.
It sounds amazing. Awesome tips, Craig.
Yeah.
And the whole point of engagement is so key because another study done by Gallup showed that only 30% in 2021 of employees are engaged. However, an engaged employee can increase companies' productivity and profitability by 21% just by changing the engagement. So it's not getting new tech or new equipment, but just by increasing engagement, you can see, increased productivity. And who wouldn't want that? Right. So we need to really pay attention to it.
I mean, you want to hear something cool? And this is hot off the press, by the way. But
Let's
I
hear
mean,
it.
we're here, and by the time this airs, it will have been launched on December 9th. We're launching what we're calling our Culture Crunch. We did this 5 years ago. It's probably, as far as I can tell, the biggest assessment of our data that we've done in a long, long time, at least since I've been here for 4.5 years. But what's amazing is now we're looking at over 4,000 organizations longitudinally over 4 years, and we're looking at them across three areas. So stage. So what are the things that we see as organizations move through different stages?
Wow.
We're looking at it from employee size growth, and then speed of growth. How, as companies, the speed that they grow. But so one is, I'm just going to call that out. If you can go to our site, Culture Crunch report will be out by then. It's phenomenal. I'm excited. I think there's a lot to come from that. However, I'm just going to share this here because with these key takeaways was that we found, look, for companies, and I imagine some of your organizations are, looking to raise money or to go public, and we found that companies are more effective at moving through those stages and raising money, of course, if they have engaged employees.
Mm.
But what's most interesting is when you rewind 3 years, we can predict the companies will be more successful at raising money based on how their scores are around engagement and a couple other factors. And I think that's so fascinating. So, of course, yeah, you would expect that when these things happen, but we can look backwards and say we can predict that now. This is why you should focus on that at this point in time, because it is a higher driver of where you're going to end up if that's the path or journey that you're on. So the data is all there. It keeps pointing the same direction, right? Do right by your people, and don't do it as just a need to, but really, like I said, fix it. Do the work. Get your leaders, lead by example. Don't just say it, because humans are amazing at smelling. Am I safe or not? Is this legit or not? And if it's not, that's when they huddle up. That's when try to be safe in my team. All the bad things we don't like really come. You talked about trust. When trust isn't there, and there's so many reasons, all the things we don't like in organizations come from that.
Yeah, love it. Decisions based on facts, not on gut feeling. And we're using the data to drive those decisions, to see into the future, to really thrive through whatever changes or challenges that may come our way. Phenomenal. And, just to follow up on that, what I've also seen is that persons, from different areas are, getting involved in the whole matter of the Great Resignation. They all are affected, but persons, so many are taking a back seat and saying, "Well, it's HR's problem." Is it really an HR problem? Or should persons be sitting by? Whose responsibility is it?
When I hear that sort of sentiment, is my first red flag, right? I mean, I think any for all of us, when I hear blame, period, my little sensing goes up. I'm like, oh, there's something here. I'm gonna keep listening. It can't be. We have to end this. I mean, yes, we need a team like HR or people, an experienced team, people ops, whatever it is, to help usher those in, to bring those things in. But if we keep thinking that it's a small team of people is responsible for culture, we're missing the mark. I often say, culture, what did I hear in grad school, about family systems, that, something unique about families and communications, even if you're not communicating, you're communicating. Like, you can never stop. I think that's culture, right? That in certain types of cultures, You can say, I'm not talking to mom anymore. I'm frustrated, whatever. You're still talking to mom by not talking to mom. And so I'd say the same thing to employees. If I hear people pointing fingers, is like, you can choose to sit and say it's HR's fault and poke holes at everything that's going on and not really take any sort of action. But that is your contribution to the culture. You are part of that culture at some level. So is that really, I mean, if that is that the contribution you want to make? And I've sort of had those conversations in ways. And I think the next one is, and I've done this with people, like, well, what is your biggest frustration? Let's get at it. And they unearth that frustration. Gosh, we're growing, and I don't think we know each other like we used to. And we used to communicate. And I say, okay, cool, fair enough. I think it's a big issue, and like that should be risen. And hopefully, there's places for you to give that feedback. Is there something you can do? Is there something you can do about that? I get it's frustrating. This was a manager. And as a matter of fact, we started a program at Culture Amp years ago called Culture Uncorked, in which came from like, you know what? How about we just as employees, we organize, everybody chips on wine, and we sat in we'd had drinks, but we connected. And that was his, we planned it together. And that was his solution to like the problem he saw was, can he do something to help bring more connection? Because ultimately what he was doing was he was missing connection, and he was projecting it onto the organization versus taking some sort of action. So I think we keep coming back to this, be the change. And I'd say the same thing. If I feel bad for those HR teams when that's the energy and attitudes there.
Yeah.
I mean, how are 4 or 5 people supposed to be responsible?
Or less. So,
people that are focused on engagement is usually 1 or 2.
Yeah.
I mean, and then those people I meet, I know those people. They're alone. They're frustrated. They're beat down. I mean, that's why they come to our community, so they can find others, which they need. That's important. But I hear it over and over and over how alone, and even in progressive organizations that want to do the work, changing behavior is hard. And the best they can do is bring in good information, ideas, programs. But if they're not adopted or supported by the leadership, they're just punching bags. And it's really frustrating.
And I think at the COO level, they are at an advantage because they can see everything right across the board. They see how everything connects and can see where the points are that, that need to be fixed, that will just pull everything together, because that synergy is going to be important and everybody playing their part. So whether it's the COO, the CMO, the CIO, it doesn't have to be the chief the people and culture or people and experience officer that does that kind of thing. Everybody can make suggestions, implement programs or aspects that will, eventually come together, right? So it's everybody's business kind of thing.
The way that most of our organizations are built right now, if you have a C in front of your name, your actions, because of our organizational structure, so quickly has such a big impact, especially and to your audience and your operations officers. So I get operation can be a very mechanical kind of exercise, and there's a lot of very, what I'd say, left brain, linear, analytical side to it. But pushing yourself to say, what if I took these operations that I'm looking at and ran them through a human lens? How are we scoring? Because in the end, you could have this great efficiency on paper, but if people if there's all these derivative issues, or people are being measured on, an outcome. I mean, I often think about, Wells Fargo, right? And, that comes up often. I don't believe there are hundreds and hundreds of people that were bad people that wanted to do bad things and make all these false accounts. I think that there was economic and emotional pressure being put on them at such a level that they did bad things to hit the goals, to get the outcomes, to make the leaders happy. Right. And if we're not looking at it through that lens and saying, well, what, and listening, we can't do it alone either. I mean, I think that's that piece of that feedback loop, and where our tools come in. How do you effectively listen if you have a large organization, to say, how are these landing on our employees, and ensuring that we're driving the right behaviors? And it goes back, you asked about remote, the same thing. Yeah, it's hard, but can we do it a little bit better? And are we listening and making sure there's so many different factors that we're focused on the right factors, and we're taking some sort of action? The last thing I'll say around all this, well, maybe I'll say more, is that there's an irony in all of it, that you don't always have to fix everything. I've learned that with these surveys. One of the things is sometimes companies will run surveys and try to fix. Ironically, if you try to do too much, even if you're doing good work, you probably aren't being able to communicate it well. You're not being able, if you are getting the results, if you're getting enough resource. So you're doing all this great work, and your people are getting more frustrated because they're not feeling heard, listened to, or seeing the outcome. Versus if you say methodically, we looked at this is how we looked at it. We've identified these 2 things that we think are going to be the biggest things for the next quarter. This is what we're going to do. These are the 2 items we're going to focus on. You're going to hear halfway through, and you're going to hear us in the end of how we did. Where I'm going with that is, it's not even about the thing. It's about the people seeing, oh, they listened. Oh, this is what they're doing. Oh, they're giving us information back. People want to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
So not forgetting that you don't have to do it perfectly. I'm in a company that builds itself on culture, and we want to be that company. And we strive towards it every day. I think what keeps me at least motivated and excited about our organization is I watch the leaders trying to live and do their best. And I know they're listening and hearing. They're not always nailing it. And I don't know that I could. And I think people miss that. So that's the human piece of like, they just want to feel like they're seen and heard and something's happening. So ironically, picking one or two things and doing something about it and communicating well that you did or didn't or whatever, where you fell short, can sometimes have a bigger impact than trying to do too many things. And even if you do them well, you're not letting them know.
Yeah, you look at the Pareto principle. You use, you don't have to do everything, but look at what gives us the biggest bang for our buck. And done is always better than perfect.
Every time I share this, people love it. It's probably an oversimplification, but we talk about change is as easy as 1, 2, 3. And I'll share because it holds. Pick one thing you want to change, come up with two things you're going to do about it, and communicate 3 times at the beginning, in the middle, and the end. It's a clear model of how to impact change. And then I get funny because I always have a hard time telling an organization pick one thing. So make it 2, 4, 6, whatever. But keep it simple. One thing, 2 things you're going to do about it. Communicate 3 times, beginning, middle, and the end. And again, another thing that often gets overlooked, and it's amazing the impact, is like that check-in question.
Yeah, absolutely, indeed. So tell me something. I know we could talk all day. I have to get in some of these questions here for you.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at engagement and linking it to values, is the traditional hierarchical structure the best way, or is there a particular design that can help to drive
You're going to push me. Okay. I personally, as a student, as somebody that at a philosophical level, no, I don't think our organizations are designed. I think we're still on the remnants of the Industrial Revolution. I think we are, and it made sense. We didn't have computer, like information flows very well in a triangle, both up and down. It's easy to get processes, when you need people turning wrenches or doing these things, and everybody has to turn 80 per hour, and that's great. But map that on top of what most of our organizations today, and we're talking about innovation, creativity, transformation, you don't create. So I think we're working on a system designed to do something very industrial in a time when we're asking for agility and creativity, so even if it's not even woo-woo about it, like psychological safety, realistically, you probably don't need as much psychological safety to turn a wrench. I don't like that. I want everybody to feel safe. However, I guarantee you, if you want somebody to be adaptive and creative and they don't feel safe, you're not getting that out of the human brain, right? So at a functional level, I think our systems are probably starting to shift. Do I have the answer? No, but I do think there are a lot of models and indicators along the way of new sort of like team of teams, holacracy. What to me is in there is smaller, self-led, autonomous teams that have a way to cross-network and communicate the way we really do in the real world now. We don't communicate hierarchically, right? I don't, just because I have a manager doesn't mean the manager's maybe I need to work with another team and I need to, get some information over here and I cross-collaborate with this team. So I think we need to start really thinking about organizational structures that help with that. I think a lot more about circles than I do triangles. I will also say you just like, when I heard you speaking and saying that there are shifts, I'm an industrial and systems engineer, but I also had some experience. Yes, I am. So you've been talking my language. Let me hear the thoughts. I'm sure there's some parallel to when you're building systems outside of humans that kind of are relevant.
Yes, and I had the opportunity of doing lean and Kaizen in Japan, hands-on. And so, when you're speaking, I'm thinking, cell manufacturing, I'm thinking quality circles from the Toyota manufacturing, model in terms of systems and how we improve systems. And so, there are things that have worked in the past that are still available, but we're still holding on to things that aren't working and very bureaucratic and not efficient, not effective. And so we're we're fighting through it, and it causes a lot of stress. And we are human beings, so we are going to feel it. It's going to impact our work, and we really need to change that.
But I do have a caveat because I want to be careful, because I think it's easy to say that, and I think most of our organizations are that way. But I'm really grateful that I was in the military, and the perspective that opened for me, right? And where I go with that is the 82nd Airborne Division can have 70,000 people anywhere in the world in 24 hours. Think about what that takes. That doesn't take everybody having an opinion. That takes hierarchy, that takes command and control, that takes systems and process, that takes, we train, we routine. And the reason I say that is because I think the most important piece about culture is not, I think people hear the word culture and have all these ideas about ping pong tables or what. I think our CEO says that your brand is your promise to your customers, and your culture or your values is how you deliver on that promise. What I take from that is, if you're the 82nd Air, what is your objective? And their objective is to have a fighting force ready to go, 70,000 people anywhere in the world in 24 hours. That's intense. Build the culture that's right for what you're trying to do. I think most of us are trying to stay in a world where we have to be nimble, adaptable. Things change so fast, and all these things, agility and all, those require something different. So again, I want to be careful of not villainizing the system that was. It was a different time built for a different thing. And in some situations, I still want a little bit of command and control. If I'm in the hospital and I'm under the knife, that there's hierarchy and people know who's doing what and who's making a decision in a situation.
Exactly. But we have to see what best fits and works for our people, our stakeholders. So we have to go through that process and determine what's right for us. And, you mentioned a quote from your CEO. One that I saw and culture from one company that I really liked was, we have a culture where we are incredibly self-critical. We don't get comfortable with our success. And I thought that was phenomenal, right? There is also something else, Craig, that is happening with the Great Resignation. Other persons are leaving, right? So they are resigning. I find that not a lot of attention, a lot of attention is being placed on how persons leave. But, what about our onboarding side of things? I've seen where that, how we onboard persons can actually lead to 6% of those employees staying at least 3 years, but do we pay attention to both? What are you seeing, and how can persons do that?
One thing I thought about when you were talking, which I thought was really interesting, was that when you're talking about the people leaving, and I can imagine leaders now like, oh gosh, they're leaving. And we talked about earlier about outcome factors versus inputs, that everybody's probably so focused on the they're leaving. How do we stop it at the output level?
Right.
And same thing. I would go back to them and say, are you doing a good job understanding why they're leaving, and go fix it at the input levels, right? Number one. So I think that's an important thing. And it's probably really hard right now when it seems acute, but the truth is all you're doing is trying to put a Band-Aid on you got to figure out where it's coming from and why. Your question was about onboarding and what we can do there. Look, here's my thought on that. I mean, I think there's the functional piece of onboarding. Do they understand the tools? Do they understand the structures? Do they understand who to communicate with? But I think where I often go with onboarding, and something that I've seen to be very effective, and what I believe about culture, and it all really boils down, and I mean, not just words on a wall, but honestly, have you done the work to understand your values? Like, what are the fundamental core pillars that if anybody's in a pinch or stuck, they can look at those and say, I have to make a decision. Is it our values? Our values drive how we're going to behave here. So I'm really big on, first, an organization getting clear, and really mean that, about what they stand for, what their values are, and these kind of core drivers of their behaviors. And then where is that embedded in your organization? Because I think organizations that are rated high on values and people see alignment to the values in the organization tend to have higher engagement, higher retention. And what's something we've done that I think is really valuable is with our new hires. And you mentioned this a little bit before. We take them through an exercise where we ask them to look at their own values. Like, literally, you really do have hundreds of people that come with hundreds of different values, and that's perfectly fine. But the goal is to say, this organization, we're trying to align people to do this thing in the world, right? How do your values match and align? So can you kind of latch your values onto that? I heard a woman, she was at the time the head of people for Warby Parker. And one of the things Warby Parker does is that I think for every pair of glasses they sell, they donate a pair of glasses to a country that's in need.
Mhm.
But what she said was not every employee here is connected to the idea of solving vision issues in around the world, but they are connected to the idea that they work for a company that wants to help solve something in the world. And I think that's important, right? That's the difference of not everybody has to be perfectly you or your executive team, but helping them align why are your values and how do those like almost like Velcro or hook on to our values so we're all in alignment as we move forward. And I think building that into your onboarding is really important. And now I'm going to flip it to the other side because I think that we don't talk enough about offboarding. And another thing I heard, the head of people from Slack was talking about a situation with their CEO, Stuart Butterfield. And he was talking about, they went through this whole thing where he wanted to put a lot of money into when people left, they were going to get benefits above and beyond what anybody else was doing. And she
Right.
went through the whole thing with him. And at the end, she said to him, fine, it's over. Why did you push so hard? And he said, you can tell a lot about a culture by the way it buries its dead. And I thought that was so poignant. Again, another place where like, oh, well, they're leaving. They're done. Missing that everybody else is watching. So how do you handle those situations, or do you leave everybody else in fear that the next day, I don't know, it could be me, right? And then what kind of culture are you creating? And let's be human. How would you want people to leave your tribe if it was your tribe that you loved and cared about and built? And that if somebody needed to leave, what's the human way to do it? And so it goes back to that, both on both sides. How do we bring them in so they understand our culture and our values? And how, when they leave, do we send them off with grace and compassion?
Exactly, exactly. Right. So we have to look at both sides of this, both affect engagement. So we can't pay attention to one and not the other. We have to look at both sides. And I like that. I remember hearing that quote about, you can tell a lot by a company how they bury their dead. In Japan, they used to say you can tell a company by, how clean their floor is. You come in and you look at the floor and you can tell, the culture and what's happening there if you want to do business with them. I thought that was something.
I heard a guy, he had all these franchises, and he said, whenever I'm going to a franchise, the first place I go is the bathroom.
Yes.
I know exactly what's going on by the state of the bathroom.
Yes, exactly. Right. So, one of the things that I have been paying attention to a lot more, I think many have been, is the whole matter of resiliency at this time. Right? How does getting the culture piece right impact innovation and build resiliency that is required for the future? Is there a link, for persons, for organizations to evolve and become more resilient in this time?
I mean, I think there's resilience at a fundamental human level, and the truth is we can't own that for everybody. I don't know what makes one human more resilient than another, but I have to believe that if we can empower our leaders and our managers to be able to have conversations and make decisions that, I've got a young employee that's single and has certain needs about their social life, whatever that might be, and another employee has children and caring for an elderly parent, and that can I make some different decisions, and can that be okay? Or does everything have to be equal across the board? So how do we start to create more human environments and giving the space to our leaders to be more human so they can, I can tell you I'm more resilient when I have a manager or somebody allowing me the space I need to take care of I've been having a lot going on with like this house project. We're working on our house. It's gone sideways. It's honestly taking a lot out of me emotionally. And the fact that I have a manager I can share that with and feel seen and heard. And some days I say, it's been a tough day. I've got a lot going on. And now we got all these workers here that I have to help with, and just feeling like, she's helping my resilience because if I had to stuff it inside and somehow figure it out and then get frustrated. And then my wife and I are bickering about it. And then I'm supposed to go and work. So I think there's that piece, but I also think, organizational resilience, I think is back to like adaptability versus rigidity. I mean, resilience, like rigid breaking versus adaptability that's more adaptable. And I also think it goes back to listening and not just listening, because we talk about this idea. It's not just a survey. It's this path of collect, understand, act, and then repeat. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is if you're doing a good job of collecting good information, you have a good system to understand it. You're taking action, which you spoke about earlier,
right,
and not doing it once. We did our survey, but seeing it as though this is a cycle we just do all the time. I think then you start to create more resilience in the organization because there's this constant movement of information and adaptability. Oh, things have shifted. Oh, we're hearing something new. oh, in the pandemic, something's different over here. Our team in Australia is feeling one way. And I think with good data and allowing our leaders, like we talked about before, to feel like they can be adaptable and understand what's going on and make unique decisions, I think that's where the resilience comes in, the fluidity versus the rigidity of policy, procedure, bureaucracy.
Sounds great. And what would be your top mistake that organization make that affect people and culture today that you want our listeners to not make this mistake, that one thing? I know there are many things.
When we're running organizations, they're so much bigger than any one of us, and you're letting yourself get in the way. You're not able to take you out of the equation. I see so many times I start talking to someone, you hear it, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I can spot it. I'm like, what I want to say, and I don't always have the opportunity, is like, that's about you. And now you're having this whole story of how you're responding to your organization, to your people, because you as the leader don't believe that's the right thing. But like, great, but this is an organization. This isn't just a one-person show, and a great leader can take themselves out of the equation. So I think that's the art of leadership and organization. How do we take ourselves out of the equation, at least enough that we can witness and see ourselves and have our own spaces? Maybe your leaders get together, they have a place to vent, they have a place to do their own work so they can show up for others, in that way. The other thing I always come back to, so many times I feel like the leaders are thinking about the customers and the end user, and I think this is probably that servant leadership piece.
Yeah.
I believe that if your executives are thinking about how to take care and make sure their vice president level have what they need to do their job, and ask the same for them to do of their directors, and ask the same for them to do of their managers, and ask the same for them to do of their people, and at the end of the day ask your employees to do the same for their customers, that's a winning model. And I think it's the outcome again. They want to jump in and fix everything at the bottom through force, versus the input is your VPs that get the right VPs, get clear, get those VPs that expect the same from, and so on and so forth. So more of that servant leadership model.
Awesome. So I really love that, Craig. Thank you for those insights. People, we have so many gems here, so many takeaways in this brief interview. But I have one last question that I always ask all my guests. I'm not letting you leave without answering this, because I believe also that there is power in the kind of questions that you ask, or the question that you ask.
That's my language.
Yeah, in your career, Craig, what's one question that you frequently use when you're working with teams to get the best outcomes?
I got it. I know it. How might we? It just keeps coming.
I knew it was going to be that. I had it written down. I said, I know you're going to say it. It's one of my favorites, as you know. Yeah.
There's something I keep leaning in. What is it? And I think I'm sitting a lot with this idea of scarcity and abundance, and watching how much we move from scarcity versus moving in a world where there's so much abundance. And I think that question, there's so many things that get done that are about, no, we can't, why not, which is fine.
Yeah.
But energetically flip it. How might we? We want to do this thing. There's a lot of obstacles. How might we? How might we move a little bit closer? It just frees the brain to go in a different direction. And that came from IDEO, which is a very respected design firm. So that's where I first heard that. I've really seen us adopt it, and I've adopted it. So that's my question. How might we?
Yeah, I actually met the person who came up with it and did a whole session with him, training session. So it was amazing. And it has changed the way how I operate and lead as well. So instead of, blurting out the solutions to all the problems when persons come to me, I go back to them and say, well, how might we? It has, that's where the creativity and the innovation has been able to come out and to tap into the collective wisdom of those around us. So I absolutely am there with you on that question. Thank you so much, Craig, for a phenomenal discussion and for sharing your insights with us today. It was really a pleasure.
It really was. I appreciate it. It's so nice to roll into this, and I know we did a little bit of prep, but what a wonderful conversation. Thanks for the thoughtful questions, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to an audience I don't normally get to interact with. And I'd say to anybody out there, please, I love LinkedIn. I use it a lot. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you hear this. That makes us just a one click away from each other. If you have a question or a thought, I'd love to hear it. And I just really appreciate you giving me the time to do this with you. So thank you.
And I'm sure our listeners are also thanking you and sending the love through Right. So we want to thank you to our listeners for listening in and hope you got those nuggets of wisdom. Clearly, you can see that Craig is someone who thinks outside the square. So you can reach out to Craig by visiting at the website that was mentioned, cultureamp.com, or you can hit him on LinkedIn to learn more about their work and review the incredible amount of resources that are available to build a stronger, more human-focused work environment. And you can reach out to me at tamara@tamaranelson.com or on LinkedIn at tamara-nelson. If you would like to be a guest or to share any feedback or suggestions you may have, I'd love to hear from you. And please share and subscribe if you found this valuable. And give us a thumbs up or a rating on Apple. So please join us again for another information-packed episode. You won't want to miss the next one. It's right in line with what we just discussed, so please stay tuned. And until next time, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.
Walk good.
Yes. Yeah, man.